Hello, dear listeners. I hope you're all doing amazing. I'm really glad we are spending these few moments together. You know, there are some conversations in life that we remember for years, not because they were extraordinary, not because someone used beautiful English, not because the person had an immersive vocabulary, but because of the way they made us feel. Have you ever experienced that? Someone said just one simple sentence, and somehow you have never forgotten it. It wasn't a quote from a famous book, it wasn't some motivational speech. It was something ordinary. Maybe I'm proud of you, or I believe in you, or even it's okay, take your time. Just a few words. Nothing complicated. And yet, those words stayed with you. Now think about the opposite. Have you ever attended a meeting or listened to a speech where the speaker used amazing English? Every sentence sounded perfect, every word sounded intelligent, but the moment it ended, you couldn't remember anything. Isn't that strange? One conversation stays with us forever, another disappears within minutes. Why? What makes one conversation unforgettable, while another is forgotten before the day even ends? I think the answer has very little to do with English and almost everything to do with emotion. Because people don't always remember our words, they remember how they felt while listening to us. Did they feel respected? Did they feel heard? Did they feel judged? Or did they leave feeling a little lighter than before? That's what stays. And today's episode is about exactly that. Not grammar, not pronunciation, not vocabulary. Those things matter, of course they do. But communication, real communication, goes far beyond language. Today, I would like to share four simple stories with you. None of these people became famous, none of them gave TED Talks, none of them wrote best selling books, but every one of them left a lasting impression on someone else's life. And by the end of the today's episode, I hope you'll start looking at every conversation a little differently. So, let's begin our first story. The Doctor. About 10 years ago, there was a doctor named Dr. Mehra. He was one of the most qualified doctors in the city. Patients trusted his knowledge. Hospitals respected him. His diagnosis was usually accurate. His treatment worked. On paper, he was an excellent doctor. Every morning, his waiting room was full. People waited patiently for their turn. Some had traveled for hours, some had taken leave from work. Some were worried parents carrying sick children. Others were elderly people who simply wanted someone to reassure them that everything would be okay. Finally, their name would be called. They would walk into Dr. Mehra's cabin with hope in their eyes. The doctor would look at the reports, write a prescription, ask one or two questions, and within 3 or 4 minutes, the consultation was over. Next patient, that was it. No smile, no eye contact, no reassurance, nothing rude, but nothing warm either. He believed, my job is to treat diseases, not emotions. And technically, he wasn't wrong. But something interesting started happening. Even though he was one of the best doctors in the town, patients slowly began choosing another clinic nearby. The other doctor was younger, less experienced, not nearly as famous, yet every day his clinic became busier. One afternoon, Dr. Mehra asked a nurse, I don't understand, my treatment is better. Why are patients going there? The nurse hesitated. She didn't want to offend him, but finally she said gently, Sir, people feel better before they even leave his cabin. Dr. Mehra looked confused. What do you mean? The nurse smiled. He looks at every patient and says, Please don't worry, we'll figure this out together. He asks them how they are feeling, not just physically, but emotionally. He remembers their names. He smiles. Sometimes he spends just 1 extra minute listening. Then she paused. And somehow, that 1 minute becomes the part people remember the most. Dr. Mehra didn't say anything, but that evening, while driving home, those words stayed with him. People feel better before they even leave his cabin? He kept asking himself, how is that possible? I am giving better treatment, but he's giving something I'm not. A week later, he decided to visit the other doctor's clinic, not as a doctor, but simply to observe. He sat quietly in the waiting area. Patient after patient walked in, and he noticed something surprising. The younger doctor wasn't using difficult medical terms. He wasn't giving long speeches. He wasn't doing anything extraordinary. He simply made every patient feel like they mattered. He looked up when they entered. He smiled. He listened without interrupting. And before they left, he always said something like, "If you have any doubts, don't hesitate to call. Take care of yourself. You'll be fine. Just follow the treatment." Simple words. Words that cost nothing. Yet they gave people something medicine alone couldn't always provide: hope. As Dr. Mehra walked back to his car, he realized something that changed him forever. People had praised his knowledge, but they remembered the other doctor's kindness. And perhaps that's one of the biggest truths about communication. People may admire your intelligence, but they connect with your humanity. My dear listeners, this isn't just true for doctors. Think about your own life. Have you ever visited two different shops selling exactly the same product, yet you always choose one over the other? Why? Is it because the product is better? Sometimes, but very often it's because of the person behind the counter. One shopkeeper smiles, the other barely looks at you. One says, "Thank you, have a nice day." The other simply hands you the bill. The difference isn't in the product, it's in the feeling, and perhaps that's why communication is never just about words. It's about the experience we create for another human being. Now tell me, have you ever gone back to the same restaurant, not because the food was extraordinary, but because of the way someone treated you? Maybe the waiter smiled every time you walked in. Maybe he remembered how you liked your tea. Maybe he asked, "How have you been, sir?" And suddenly, you didn't feel like a customer anymore. You felt like someone they genuinely remembered. It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes people don't return because of the product. They return because of the person, and that reminds me of another story. There was a small cafe in a busy part of the city. Nothing luxurious, no fancy interiors, no expensive menu, just good food and a warm atmosphere. Every evening, the cafe was packed. People waited outside for tables. The owner often wondered, why do people choose my cafe when there are so many bigger restaurants nearby? At first, he thought it was the coffee. Then he thought it was the prices, but one day he discovered the real reason. His name was Aman, a young waiter, probably in his mid 20s. He wasn't the fastest waiter, he wasn't the most experienced either. Sometimes he even forgot an order. Yet customers loved him. Children waved at him when they entered. Elderly couples smiled the moment they saw him. Office workers specifically asked, "Is Aman working today?" The owner couldn't understand it. One afternoon, when the cafe wasn't very busy, he decided to observe Aman closely. A family walked in. Before they could even sit down, Aman smiled and said, "Welcome back, it's been a long time." The father looked surprised. "You remembered us?" Aman laughed. "Of course, your little daughter always orders extra cheese on her pasta." The little girl smiled proudly. He remembered. The parents looked at each other and smiled. It was such a small moment, but it changed the mood of the entire evening. A few minutes later, an elderly man entered alone. Aman walked straight to him. "The usual table near the window?" The old man nodded. "And without sugar in your tea, right?" The man smiled. "Exactly." No one had to tell Aman. He simply paid attention. Later that evening, a young couple came in. It was raining outside. They were simply soaked. Instead of immediately handing them the menu, Aman brought two glasses of warm water. Then he smiled and said, "Please take your time. There is no hurry." The couple looked relieved. It wasn't part of his job description. Nobody had trained him to do that. He simply noticed what people needed. That night, after the cafe closed, the owner asked him, "Aman, what's your secret?" Aman looked confused. "My secret?" "Yes. People seem happier after talking to you." "How do you do it?" Aman thought for a few seconds. Then he smiled. "I don't really know." The owner waited. Finally, Aman said, "I just try to notice people. If someone looks tired, I speak a little more gently. If someone looks upset, I don't rush them. If children come, I joke with them. If elderly people come, I help them sit comfortably. Everyone wants food, but before that, everyone wants to feel seen." The owner didn't say anything because he knew those words were worth remembering. A few months later, Aman received an offer from another restaurant. The salary was almost double. Naturally, he accepted. The owner wished him well, but something unexpected happened. Within weeks, regular customers started asking, "Where is Aman?" Some even followed him to the new restaurant, not because the food had changed, not because the menu was different, but because Aman had made them feel important. You know, my dear listeners, isn't that beautiful? He wasn't giving motivational speeches. He wasn't using impressive English. He wasn't trying to be extraordinary. He simply remembered names. He listened carefully. He smiled sincerely. He noticed people, and somehow that became his greatest communication skill. Sometimes we think communication is all about speaking, speaking fluently, speaking confidently, speaking beautifully, but perhaps communication begins long before we open our mouths. It begins when we pay attention, when we notice, when we make another person feel I matter. And honestly, isn't that what all of us are looking for? Not someone who has the perfect words, but someone who makes us feel that our presence matters. Now, let me tell you about someone whose words changed a life forever. Not because they were extraordinary, but because they came at exactly the right moment. And that's the story of a teacher who probably never realized how powerful a single sentence could be. When we think about our school days, most of us don't remember every lesson. We don't remember every chapter we studied. We don't remember every homework assignment. But somehow we remember certain teachers. Not because they taught us grammar or mathematics or science. We remember them because of the way they spoke to us. Sometimes one sentence from a teacher stays in our heart for decades. And this is the story of one such sentence. There was a boy named Rahul. He was a brilliant student. He wasn't the class topper. He wasn't the funniest child either. In fact, he spent most of his school life trying not to be noticed. Whenever the teacher asked a question, Rahul immediately looked down at his notebook, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was afraid. Afraid of saying something wrong, afraid of making mistakes, afraid that the whole class would laugh. So he stayed quiet. Day after day, month after month, year after year. One day, their English teacher announced, "Tomorrow, everyone will come to the front of the class and speak for 2 minutes." The classroom suddenly became noisy. Some students were excited, some started discussing topics, but Rahul felt his heart sink. He knew this was going to be a disaster. That evening, he stood in front of the mirror at home. He practiced again and again and again. But every time he imagined standing in front of the class, his mind went blank. His hands started shaking. His voice became weak. Finally, he closed the notebook. "I can't do this." The next morning, one by one, students came to the front. Some spoke confidently, some forgot a few words. Everyone clapped. Then the teacher called Rahul. For a few seconds, he didn't move. His classmates looked at him. Slowly, he walked to the front. He could hear his own heartbeat. His palms were sweaty. He looked at the class, opened his mouth, and nothing, not a single word came out. The classroom became completely silent. A few students smiled. Someone at the back whispered he forgot. Rahul wished the ground would open and swallow him. Just then, his teacher stood up. She walked slowly toward him. She didn't look angry. She didn't look disappointed. She simply smiled. Very softly, she said, "Rahul, it's okay. You don't have to impress anyone. Just tell us one thing. What made you smile this week?" Rahul looked at her. That wasn't the topic he had prepared, but somehow it felt easier. After a long pause, he quietly said, "My little sister tried to feed our dog with a spoon." A few students laughed, not at Rahul, but the picture they imagined. The teacher laughed too. Then she asked, "And what happened next?" Rahul smiled. For the first time since he had come to the front, he smiled. He forgot that everyone was watching him. He simply started telling the story. His English wasn't perfect. He paused many times. He searched for words. He made grammar mistakes, but nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. When he finished, the entire class applauded. Not because it was the best speech, but because he had found the courage to speak. After class, Rahul quietly thanked his teacher. She smiled and said something he would never forget. She said, "Fluent English can be learned, but courage begins the day you stop being afraid of making mistakes." Rahul carried those words with him for years. Whenever he felt nervous, he remembered that day. Whenever he doubted himself, he remembered that sentence. Years passed, Rahul finished college, he got his first job, and one day he was invited to give a presentation in front of nearly 300 people. As he stood backstage, his hands were shaking again. Then suddenly he heard that familiar voice in his mind. You don't have to impress anyone, just share something meaningful. He smiled, walked onto the stage, and delivered one of the best presentations of his life. A few months later, he visited his old school. His English teacher had retired. When she saw him, she smiled immediately. Rahul, I almost didn't recognize you. They spoke for a while. Before leaving, Rahul said, Ma'am, do you remember the day I couldn't speak in the class? She looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled. Honestly, I don't. Rahul laughed. But I do. You changed my life that day. The teacher became quiet. She had probably spoken thousands of sentences during her career. She had no idea that one simple sentence had stayed with someone for nearly 20 years. You know, my dear listeners, that's the beautiful thing about communication. We often underestimate our words. We think it's just one compliment, it's just one encouraging sentence, it's just one conversation. But we never know what someone else is carrying inside them. Sometimes a person needs advice, sometimes they need a solution, but very often they simply need someone to believe in them before they can believe in themselves. And perhaps that's one of the greatest gifts we can give another human being. Not perfect English, not perfect grammar, but genuine encouragement. Because confidence grows when someone says, I believe you can do this. And now, before we end today's episode, I would like to share one final story. It's about a small shop, an ordinary shopkeeper, and a lesson that completely changed the way I look at communication. There was a small grocery store. If you compare it with the supermarkets nearby, it looks quite ordinary. And yet, every evening, there is always a small crowd outside. People wait patiently for their turn. Children walk in confidently. Elderly people stop for a quick chat. And sometimes, people buy just one packet of biscuits and still spend 5 minutes talking to the shopkeeper. Have you ever wondered why some places feel different? It's not always about the products. Sometimes it's about the people. And that reminds me of one last story. In a small town, there lived a shopkeeper named Iqbal. His shop wasn't very big. He sold groceries, tea, soap, rice, biscuits, the same things every other shopkeeper sold. Just 2 streets away, a brand new supermarket opened. It had brighter lights, more variety, discounts every weekend, home delivery, even online payment and loyalty points. Everyone assumed Iqbal's little shop wouldn't survive. People said, how can a small shop compete with a supermarket? Iqbal simply smiled. He never argued. He just opened his shop every morning, exactly as he always had. A few weeks passed, the supermarket remained busy. But surprisingly, Iqbal's shop never became empty either. One afternoon, the manager of the supermarket noticed this. Out of curiosity, he walked over to Iqbal's shop. He stood quietly outside, just watching. The first customer was an elderly woman. Before she could say anything, Iqbal smiled. Good afternoon, Auntie. How is your knee now? The old woman smiled. It's much better. My grandson has come home for the holidays. Iqbal's face lit up. Oh, really? He must have grown taller by now. She laughed. Come and see him someday. She bought only a loaf of bread but left smiling. A few minutes later, a young boy entered. He looked nervous. I forgot my wallet, I'll pay tomorrow. Without asking a single question, Iqbal handed him the milk and bread. No problem, tell your mother not to worry. The boy thanked him and ran home. The supermarket manager was surprised. What if he never comes back? Iqbal smiled. He always comes back. The manager stayed for another hour. He noticed something unusual. Every customer was greeted by name. Every child was asked about school. Every elderly customer was helped with heavy bags. People were not in a hurry to leave. Some even stood there, chatting for a few minutes before going home. It felt less like a shop and more like part of the neighborhood. Finally, the manager walked inside. I have a question. Iqbal smiled. Go ahead. You don't offer discounts. You don't have a huge selection. You don't have air conditioning. So why do people keep coming here? Iqbal looked around his little shop. Then he smiled. They can buy groceries anywhere. He paused, but they can't feel at home everywhere. The manager remained silent. Iqbal continued. When someone enters my shop, I don't see a customer, I see a person. Someone who may have had a difficult day, someone who might need a smile, someone who simply wants to feel noticed. The manager nodded slowly. For the first time, he understood something that no business school had ever taught him. People don't always choose places because they are cheaper. They choose places where they feel comfortable, where they feel respected, where they feel remembered. A year later, the supermarket was still there, and so was Iqbal's little shop. Both were successful. But whenever someone in the town needed advice, or wanted to share good news, or simply felt lonely, they walked into Iqbal's shop first, not because he had the best products, but because he had mastered something far more valuable: the art of making people feel important. You know, my dear listeners, all four stories we have shared today, the doctor, the waiter, the teacher, and the shopkeeper, have one thing in common. None of them became unforgettable because of the language. They became unforgettable because of the feelings they created. And maybe that's the biggest lesson communication has to teach us. We spend so much time asking, how can I speak better? How can I improve my vocabulary? How can I sound more fluent? Those are wonderful questions. People keep learning English, keep reading, keep practicing, keep making mistakes, because every mistake is one step closer to confidence. But along with improving your English, ask yourself a different question. How do people feel after talking to me? Do they feel heard? Do they feel respected? Do they feel encouraged? Do they leave with a smile? Because years from now, they probably won't remember every word you said. They won't remember whether your grammar was perfect. They won't remember the difficult vocabulary, but they'll remember something much more important: how you made them feel. And sometimes that's the most beautiful form of communication. Well, that's all for today's conversation, my dear listeners. If this episode reminded you of someone, a teacher, a doctor, a friend, a parent, or even a stranger who made you feel seen, take a moment to appreciate them. And if you can be that person for someone else tomorrow, don't wait. A kind word, a patient ear, a genuine smile, or a simple "how are you" might become the conversation they remember for the rest of their life. Until we meet again, keep learning English, but more importantly, keep learning to connect with people. Because language helps us speak, but kindness helps us communicate. Take care of yourself, stay curious, stay kind, and as always, I'll be here waiting for you in our next conversation. See you in the next episode.